What if I told you that releasing your brake a split second before hitting a bump could save you $600 in suspension repairs? Most drivers don't realize that hard braking shifts your car's weight forward, making impacts 40 times worse. But there's a simple trick mechanics use that keeps your suspension intact. Stick around, I'll show you how to time it perfectly, plus 19 other ways to protect your car's undercarriage from costly damage. Most drivers have no idea their daily commute could be quietly wrecking their car's suspension and draining their wallet. Each pothole hit while braking, every salted winter road, and even a routine parking habit can slowly add up to thousands in damage. You might not feel it immediately, but one day you're handed a $1,200 estimate for blown struts, cracked control arms, or a bent wheel hub, and you're left wondering how it got that bad. But what if I told you that a simple change in how you approach a bump in the road could prevent most of that damage? There's a trick mechanics use all the time, and it costs nothing to do. Just by releasing your brake a second before hitting a pothole or bump, you could save up to $600 in repairs per impact. And that's just the beginning. Most drivers never learn these subtle, preventative techniques because they're not taught in driver's ed or found in a car manual. Yet they're the same strategies used by professional fleet operators to keep vehicles running well past 200,000 miles without major suspension work. The secret isn't just in the parts you replace, but in the timing, positioning, and tiny maintenance steps that protect those parts from wear in the first place. The brake trick that saves $600 per pothole. Ever notice how your car crashes harder into bumps when you're braking? That's because braking shifts over 1,000 pounds of weight forward onto your front suspension. This extra weight compresses your springs and shocks before they even hit the bump, leaving them with less room to absorb the impact. When your wheel hits a pothole while braking, the impact spikes can reach 40 to 50 Gs at the wheel hub even at slow speeds. These extreme forces cause real damage, bent rims, torn rubber bushings, and even $600 ABS sensor replacements. Mechanics see these repairs constantly, especially in cities with rough roads. There's a simple solution that could have prevented most of this damage. Release your brake pedal 1 second before hitting the bump. This allows your suspension to rebound to its normal position, giving your springs and shocks their full range of motion to absorb the impact properly. Here's why this works. When you brake, your front suspension compresses under the extra weight. By releasing the brake before the bump, you let the suspension extend back to normal height. Now when your wheel hits the bump, your suspension can move upward to cushion the impact instead of already being halfway compressed. This technique costs nothing to implement but could save you hundreds in repairs. That ABS sensor repair alone typically costs $600, and that's before factoring in possible rim damage or suspension component replacement. Mechanics estimate 1 in 4 drivers could avoid these repairs just by adjusting their braking timing. The key is anticipation. Start watching for bumps and potholes further ahead. When you spot one, ease off the brake smoothly about 1 second before impact. Don't slam off the brakes, just reduce pressure gradually. This gives your suspension time to recover before the bump. Try this next time you drive. Find an empty parking lot with some small bumps or dips. Brake normally over them first and notice how harsh the impact feels. Then try releasing the brakes just before hitting the same bumps. You'll immediately feel the difference in how your suspension absorbs the impact. While this technique helps, brakes aren't the only factor wearing out your suspension. Small rubber components most drivers ignore play a huge role in protecting your expensive suspension parts. Some of these critical pieces cost less than $20 to replace, but failing to maintain them can lead to $1,500 repair bills. The $10 parts that protect $1,500 in suspension. Those small rubber bump stops hiding inside your suspension might look insignificant, but they're actually preventing thousands in damage. When your car bottoms out, like hitting a deep pothole or driveway dip, these parts absorb the impact before metal components crash together. Without them, your struts take the full blunt force, leading to expensive failures later. Most drivers don't realize bump stops wear out between 60,000 and 80,000 miles. Road salt makes it worse, drying out the rubber until it cracks and crumbles. You might not notice immediately because they fail gradually. Listen for a dull thunk from the front end when hitting bumps. That's often the first sign they're going bad. Ignore it, and you could be looking at blown strut seals or damaged shock towers needing $1,500 repairs. Here's how bump stops get compromised. First, the rubber dries out and loses elasticity. Then small chunks start breaking off whenever your suspension compresses fully. Eventually, there's not enough material left to cushion impacts. When this happens, your strut piston can smash against the internal components with every hard bump. This causes hydraulic fluid leaks and seal failures that require full strut replacement. Checking them requires lifting the car and removing the wheels. Look for the rubber cone-shaped pieces mounted near the top of the strut assembly. If they're cracked, missing chunks, or feel hard instead of slightly spongy, they need replacement. The good news? New ones cost around $10 to $25 per pair online or at auto parts stores. Mechanics recommend always replacing bump stops when changing struts. Here's why: there's zero extra labor cost since the strut's already apart, and fresh bump stops protect your new investment. They install in seconds once the strut assembly is disassembled. Use a dab of silicone grease when installing new ones so they don't stick to the strut shaft. Fleet operators swap these routinely because they know $20 in preventative parts beats $1,500 in suspension repairs later. The same logic applies to your personal vehicle. If yours look worn during tire rotations or brake work, replace them immediately rather than waiting until they completely fail. For vehicles driven in snowy climates where roads get salted, inspect bump stops annually. Salt residue accelerates the drying process, sometimes cutting their lifespan in half. A quick spray with rubber protectant when washing undercarriages can help extend their life in harsh conditions. Speaking of cheap fixes that pay off big, there's a $20 tool that can double your suspension's lifespan when used regularly. Fleet mechanics rely on it daily to keep their trucks running smooth past 200,000 miles without major suspension work. How fleet vehicles hit 200,000 miles on original suspension. Ever wonder why taxis and work trucks can hit 200,000 miles on their original suspension while yours starts failing at 80,000? The difference comes down to one simple maintenance habit: fleet mechanics swear by regular greasing of suspension joints. Most personal vehicles never get this basic care, yet it's what keeps fleet vehicles running smoothly for years longer. Here's what happens without proper greasing: road contaminants like dirt, water, and salt work their way into suspension joints. Over time, these turn the protective grease into a gritty paste that accelerates wear. The metal components start grinding against each other instead of moving smoothly, leading to premature failure of ball joints and tie rods. Fleet mechanics see this constantly on neglected vehicles. The telltale stiffness and squeaking means the joint is running dry. The solution is simple: a $20 grease gun. Many suspension components have small metal nipples called Zerk fittings designed specifically for grease injection. These serviceable joints are meant to be maintained, though most drivers never touch them. A quick shot of fresh grease forces out the old contaminated grease and creates a new protective barrier inside the joint. Fleet vehicles get this done routinely, often timed with oil changes or other regular maintenance. To do it yourself, first locate the grease fittings on your ball joints and tie rod ends. They look like small metal nipples sticking out from the joints. Attach your grease gun nozzle firmly over the fitting and pump slowly until you see fresh grease start to squeeze out around the joint seals. This ensures you've completely flushed out the old grease. Do this every oil change or every 5,000 miles for best results. Listen for warning signs between services. Squeaking or stiffness when turning the wheel often means joints need grease. When left too long, the damage becomes irreversible. In extreme cases, Source 302-8562 warns that a dried-out joint can cause a wheel to separate at highway speeds. This simple 5-minute task can add 100,000 miles to your suspension's life. Fleet operators know it's far cheaper to spend $5 on grease than $500 replacing worn joints. The same logic applies to your personal vehicle. Regular greasing prevents wear that leads to costly repairs down the road. For best results, use lithium-based grease specifically made for automotive suspension components. In snowy climates where roads get salted, increase greasing frequency to every 3,000 miles. Always wipe fittings clean before attaching the grease gun to avoid forcing dirt into the joint. Now let's tackle the $3 billion problem eating suspensions alive: corrosion from road salt. While greasing protects the moving parts, there's another winter threat silently destroying suspension components from the outside in. The winter mistake that costs $3 billion annually. Road salt doesn't just leave white streaks on your paint, it's eating away at your suspension from the inside out. That salty residue accelerates corrosion on critical parts like coil springs, suspension bolts, and control arms. Mechanics in snowy states see the damage daily. A $10 bolt seized by rust can turn into an $1,800 repair when it snaps during replacement. The numbers don't lie. Corrosion-related suspension failures cost U.S. drivers $3 billion annually. That includes snapped springs that leave cars sagging, seized bolts that require torch cutting, and control arms so rusted they crumble during removal. One mechanic described pulling a coil spring off a truck only for it to crack in half, rusted through from years of salt exposure. The fix costs far less than the repairs. A $15 can of rust inhibitor like fluid film or WD-40 Specialist corrosion inhibitor can protect your suspension through winter. These lanolin-based sprays creep into seams, repel water, and stay sticky for months. Apply it every fall before salt hits the roads. The timing matters because once rust starts, inhibitors can't reverse it. Key areas need attention. Coat coil springs where salt collects between the coils, suspension bolts that seize when corroded, and control arm seams where moisture gets trapped. Even in mild climates, salty brine used before snowfalls can cause damage. Fleet operators swear by this routine. Their trucks last years longer because they stop rust before it starts. Application takes 10 minutes with the car on ramps or a lift. Focus on the suspension's underside where road splash hits hardest. The spray wicks into gaps inhibitors can reach but washes can't. Mechanics recommend reapplying midwinter if you drive frequently on salted roads. Ignoring this leads to predictable failures. Rust thins metal until springs snap under load. Corroded bolts round off when wrenched, forcing expensive drilling. Control arms weaken until bushings tear free. These aren't sudden failures, they happen gradually, making prevention easy if you act early. The savings add up quickly. A single rust-seized bolt can turn a $200 strut replacement into a $600 job. Control arm replacements with labor often exceed $1,000 per side when corrosion complicates the work. Compare that to $15 per year for inhibitor spray, and the choice is clear. Even garaged vehicles need protection. Condensation alone causes slow corrosion, and short winter drives expose suspensions to salt residue. The inhibitor's sticky film blocks moisture whether you daily drive or park for weeks. One final tip: avoid pressure washing suspension components in winter. It blasts away protective grease and drives salt deeper into joints. Instead, rinse with gentle flowing water and reapply inhibitor after washes. While rust is a silent killer, your parking habits cause equally expensive damage. Curb impacts and angled parking put uneven stress on suspension parts. Next, we'll show how simple adjustments can prevent $1,600 in repairs. Conclusion: the truth is most suspension failures don't happen overnight, they creep up through months of small damages adding up. But these simple habits can stop them completely. Combined, these tips could save the average driver over $5,000 in suspension repairs. That's more than many cars are worth after a few years. Start small, try just one tip this week. Maybe release brakes before bumps or check those rubber bump stops. Feel how your ride improves when suspension works like it should. Then add another habit next week. Within months, you'll be preventing damage without even thinking about it. Your suspension's longevity comes down to basic care, not expensive repairs.